Apologies that we're not here. You know, we've sat in this room on many occasions with 2 people in the gallery, so it's very nice to see lots of people here today. There is a number of different items today that people are here for. There is the first one that we will be hearing. The first one will be the Dorigo artwork. So if you're here for that, it might be, you know, you should stay. If you're here for Milestone or for the housing strategy, you know, there will be a time where people will come in and out. I'm sure that people that are here for Dorigo, not all will stay for the whole meeting. That's what usually happens. So if we want to try and fit everyone in, the first one that we will be doing will be Dorigo. Then we will do the housing strategy and then the Milestone pathway. So if you're here for the Milestone pathway, you have got a bit of time to enjoy the beautiful morning. So I'll just remind people, if that's what you want to do, that's okay. Otherwise, we'll just have to squash everyone in and do the best we can.
I'm all the public access presentations together.
There's lots of chairs outside that can come in.
I'm just trying to create.
We've just got some issues with fitting everyone off. There's some people now. They've got later on. And we'll go out. We'll go out and announce.
We will come out.
We'll come out and let you know.
Look here.
Thank you, everyone.
It will be announced.
Yeah.
The CT area.
Alison, would you like to move these couple back now?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So, welcome everyone. Sorry about that bit of a shuffle. I'd just like to start the meeting by acknowledging that we are meeting today on the lands of the traditional custodians of this country, the Bellingen people. Very strong, powerful and resilient people that have walked this land for many, many thousands of years and have a very intricate relationship with all the living and non-living parts of this country. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. I'd also like to remind everyone today that we are webcasting the council meeting for the first time. This is a state government requirement, and that everyone in attendance at the meeting should refrain from making any defamatory statements during this thing, as you will be recorded. So this is a new initiative. I think it's a good one. You know, I'm sure lots of people spend lots of time watching this in their own privacy of their own home. I say that with tongue in cheek. Okay, item 2 is apologies. We do have an apology from Councillor Steve Clifton. I need someone to move to accept that apology. Councillor Harrison, second Councillor Carter. All those in favour? Item 3 is declaration of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interest, and I will get the General Manager to read those out.
Mr Mayor, I have a declaration of interest from Councillor Tony Wright-Turner. It's in relation to the Bellingen Shire local housing strategy, which is item the declaration is non-pecuniary and less than significant. I also have a declaration of interest from Councillor Jenny Fenton. It's in relation to the same item. Again, it's non-pecuniary and less significant.
Okay, item 4 is that the minutes of the ordinary meeting and the extraordinary meeting held on the 27th of November 2019 be confirmed. I'm looking for a mover. Councillor Carter. Seconder. Councillor Harrison. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Is there any matters arising from those minutes? Okay, we will move on to item 6, public access presentations. We do have a number of those today and they will happen at 9:30. And we will try and run those public presentations before each of those items because I think there's 3 separate items in Item 7, the mayoral minute, there is nil. Item 8, the notice of motion, there is nil. Item 9, resilient economy, there is nil. So we will move to item 10.1, which is the Memorial Hall Community Meeting Room fees and charges. We do have, Alison, you doing that one? We do have Alison here. If there's any questions, and I will open it up to questions if there is any, council. Okay, so I'm looking for a mover. These are reluctant today because we're on TV. Councillor Harrison.
Did you have to remind us?
Seconder, Councillor Wright Turner. Do you want to speak to this, Councillor Harrison?
No, I think it's very well stated in the motion.
Okay. If there's no opposition, I will put it. All those in favour? Okay. Now item 10.2, and this is the Community Wellbeing Progress Report. Once again, we do have Alison here. Thank you for that report, Alison. It's great to have that as an added one now, so we get an understanding of what's been done there. Is there any questions, councillors? Because I'll open it up for questions before I look for a mover. I have actually two, Alison. First one, I noted in item 3.3 that the Dorrigo Support Centre are currently supporting 7 people with their NDIS plans.
Yes.
So one that's a great initiative for us, but could you sort of explain what our role is there?
We have two different roles. One is as a brokerage service for people who have directly got a package of money from the government. So, and we provide them either with direct services if that's what's required, or advice and assistance on where they can get services that they require. So there's an advocacy and assistance role and a direct service role with people who have their own, people who want us, who want advice. Then there's people who, and they're managing their own package. There are other people who want us to manage their money for them because they need that level of support, and that again, it's the same sort of system that you will be. It's directly what those individuals need. So there's a care plan that's done together with the individual, and the services and supports are put in place according to their needs and desires, or where they're at in their stage of development, and mobility and able-bodiedness, or wherever they're at in their situation, to move them along on the path that they want to be on. So it's an assistance and advocacy, assistance and direct support.
Okay, so is that something that councils do? Is that something that's been asked? And the other question on top of that one is, are we doing it in other places except, not just Dorrigo? And I ask that question because I know there's been a lot of drama about people trying to access that funding from NDIS. So I think it's a great initiative. I'm just wondering how widespread that is, and it's the first time that I've realised that council are also involved in that as another service that we provide to the community.
Okay, many councils are involved in this service. Many aren't. It's a choice by councils to do this. We're involved because we've provided aged and disability services through the Dorrigo Support Centre for 25 to 30 years. Yeah. It used to be what's called block funded, so the government provided all the funding for both aged services and disability services. It shifted to the National Disability Insurance Scheme, as people would be aware, in the last few years, and that's been a transition. We weren't sure whether there would be a role, whether people would need that level of assistance still, but there has been a demand from the community for that, and we have the staff who are dual qualified in aged and disability services, so they have the expertise to be able to guide people if they need that level of assistance. Aged services are still block funded up until 2022. It's always only been provided from Dorrigo because Bellingen and Urunga had services. And there wasn't any in Dorrigo, so council stepped in and the government provided the money for council to step in and provide those services. That's now not the case. I think, there may be a case for services to be extended. There may be a case for services to not be provided by council. I have put in the operational plan a review of the support centre services so that all those items can be considered by council in a deliberate way. And that will give an overview of the kind of services that are available and the sorts of issues people are encountering in trying to get service or with the services they already receive, if there's any gaps in services. Some of the time it's been very hard for people to get the kind of service that they need just because the people aren't available where they need it or when they need it. So there's a lot of issues, but what I've proposed to do is to bring that together, and that's in the operational plan, bring that together in one report so you can consider all those issues and make an informed decision.
Thank you. And the other question I have is around, it's in item 4, around advice and recovery. That might be the GM to answer this one, but the Mid-North Coast Joint Organisation is hosting a regional preparedness officer whose role will be work across the region in terms of preparedness and recovery. I'm just sort of wondering if we have any idea when that person will be put in place.
That person, through you, Mr. Mayor, that person is in place, and that person was in place as of last week. Just by way of background, the Mid-North Coast JO did work to determine its priorities, and one of the issues that came out of that strongly was disaster preparedness. In addition, the 3 councils did a piece of social research called Why Local Government Matters. That research also showed that an issue of great importance was community preparedness for disaster. As a consequence, the joint organisation was able to work with the Office of Emergency Management, and this is before any of it was passed, to secure a regional preparedness officer. And one of the reasons that we were able to do that is our region suffers a lot of natural disaster. In the main, in the past, mainly flood, but more recently bushfire. The regional preparedness officer is currently scoping out what they think the project looks like, and that will be reported to the next board meeting of the joint organisation.
So have they determined where they're operating out of here?
At the moment, the officer is operating out of Port Macquarie, but the project covers the region, so that is from Port Macquarie to north to Coffs Harbour.
Okay. Is there any further questions, councillors? Okay, if not, I am looking for a mover, Councillor Fenton. Seconder, Councillor Wright Turner. Did you speak to that, Councillor Fenton?
Just briefly through you, Mr. Mayor, I second your comments that it's a great summary of all the incredible sort of less tangible work that council's doing. I commend council for filling that space for people with disability on the plateau. That in theory the NDIS has changed the world, but in practice it's changed the world for a very small proportion of Australians who live with disability. I think, it's really good to be reminded of all the incredible work that's happening, particularly around the library stuff. How exciting to see the Urunga Library progress to being a more accessible, usable building. I'm really looking forward to the opening of that and seeing that become a more used facility. Lots of great work in there. Thanks, Alison.
Okay, if there is no opposition, I will put it. All those in favour? Councillors, due to the time and our public presentation being at 9:30, I'm going to have to have a proper motion that we defer items 10.3, 11.1 and 12.2, 11.2 until 9:30. So we will move on to the preceding motions before that. So I need someone to move that motion. Councillor Wright Turner, seconder, Councillor Carter, and I'll put it, all those in favour. So we'll move to item 12.1, which is the proposed waste facility fees and charges. I will open that up to questions. So is there any questions, councillors? I have one. Just wanting to get an idea about the weighbridge at the rally facility, when we're thinking that might be put in place.
Through Mr Mayor, these are the fees and charges for the weighbridge at rally. So as soon as they're adopted by council, assuming it's today, we will set a date for the official opening. The weighbridge has been in operation for our own works crews to conduct a test for the last month or so, and everything's going well. So once we have some fees and charges adopted, we can look at when we open it. That's ready.
Okay, that's a great step. Obviously, that's going to help people that are bringing stuff in. Councillor Wright Turner.
Yes, through you, Mr Mayor. Just a clarification, and it's a question that came up for me previously when we saw this. Just an explanation of what it means in I think it's the second page of the report, the table about contaminated soil. I know that it's under the current fee, it's saying $180.70 per cubic metre. Not specified as contaminated waste has been the costing for contaminated soil. It's not mentioned in the next one, so I'm just. Oh, Alex.
Sorry, this has been moved quite far forward from where I was expecting. I apologise.
That's okay.
Through Mr Mayor, Alex, we've just got a question from Councillor Tony Wright Turner regarding the difference between contaminated soil and non-contaminated soil. And I'm sorry, Councillor Wright Turner, would you just repeat that question again?
It's just on the second page where there's the table, and it's probably technical and it's not really related to the fees and charges, but it's trying to understand why we have a waste type contaminated soil, and then in our current fee structure, it goes $180.70 per cubic metre, but then it says not specified as contaminated waste. And I'm wondering how you take contaminated soil that's not specified as contaminated waste. It's not listed with the new fee structure.
Okay.
What does that mean?
Through you, Mr Mayor. So the old fee structure was quite, I would say quite liberal, and it didn't have many different categories. So I've tried to rejig things so that it makes it very clear what is and isn't contaminated. Now, I understand you don't really understand which is which, and it is a little bit technical, but basically the contaminated relates to things that have come from building sites, because we don't exactly know what may or may not be in the soil. We would assume that it's got possibly asbestos fibres and things like that. So it would either be subject to further testing, which is why we prefer people to phone ahead, or it's dealt with as if it does have asbestos or that contains materials, concretes, potentially leads, things like that. So that's the difference basically. It's really to deter us from having those type of materials. Because I'm sure you can appreciate it, it does mean that it's a high risk for the people that are dealing with it.
What are the options then for people who have contaminated waste if we're deterring them from having them come to somewhere that can presumably deal with it better than most?
Well, when I say, sorry, through you, Mayor, when I say deter, what I mean is they either have it tested properly themselves, so the onus is on them to actually have it tested to prove to us that it's not contaminated, which is the preferable option, but unfortunately a lot of builders and the like don't bother with that. They just want to get rid of the material, and it's usually written into the quote, which may or may not be an insurance job. So it's really to push it back onto them to actually prove to us that it is safe or safer, There are other landfills around. I know that Coffs has a limited life, but they do have a number of different contaminated levels. So their fees and charges are very complicated. So I'm trying to simplify it compared to theirs. So they have different levels of contamination. How they determine that level, I don't know, unless they get the customer as such to actually prove to them what the level of contamination rate is. So they have, for example, something like 80%, less than 60%, etc., etc. So they have it graded like that. Nambucca also take different materials, and they have a similar view to us, in that really the onus should be on them, or it's treated as being more contaminated.
And the costs that go with that.
Yeah, that's right. So it would be cheaper for the builder, if it was a builder, for example, or excavation company, to actually do their own testing and prove to us that it is less or more contaminated. Otherwise, they get charged more. It's a little bit of human nature, can often be a little bit go for the easy option, which is to just pay more, which is what we want people to think about, what they're actually getting rid of. Or can they source separate, which can often be done. They can separate the concrete, for example, from, instead of smashing it all up together. So it's really aimed to push a little bit more source separation rather than just drag it all up and dump it at the tip.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any further questions? Okay, so I'm looking for a mover. Councillor Turner. Second of Councillor Jenkins. Did you need to speak to that, Councillor Turner? Okay. If there's no opposition, I will put it. All those in favour? Okay, so we've got item 12.2, which is the water status report, and we're just getting the answer for water and sewer. Just to come in and answer any questions. So is there questions, councillors? Okay, so Councillor Fenton has got one.
They're not ready.
All right, so we can ask those questions if they need to take it on.
I'm happy to let that go.
I've just got one question. If we could have, I'm hoping someone can answer that, just an update of where we are in terms of the desalination, reverse osmosis plant. If we could just get an update about where we are on that. Are you able to do that?
Sure. So we're still talking with DPI in relation to the current scenario with the river levels and obviously potential rainfalls. Are not in a position to make the definite decision at this stage, but obviously as we assess what the river levels are doing, how the forecast develops, we'll make a decision from there.
So in terms of the fund, we've received funding to do that, haven't we?
That's correct, yes.
So how are we starting to put the funds in place for that?
Yes, so we are looking at, already have funds well in place, and we are procuring the infrastructure in order to set up the desalination plant should it be required. That will obviously be infrastructure that will be set up for the future as well.
Through you, Mr Mayor, in addition, there's a range of approvals that are required for council to operate such a plant, and we are in the process of securing those approvals. We are, the river and river flows are overseen by DPI. That's why we have a reference back to them constantly throughout this process. And we will have another discussion later in the week with the DPI in terms of what the river flows are and what the river forecasts are. Because there will need to be a final decision made.
So further to that question, so that being the emergency option, what other options are we looking at in terms of our water supply and management?
Council is secured money last year in order to do a detailed options report. That report is, that work is underway, and we would expect that report to come back to council in the next couple of months in order that we can then work through what those options are and then proceed to it.
So is there examples of what that might look like?
There are examples.
What are we actually looking at?
There are examples of what that might look like. The examples include, at the moment, the council, certain of the valleys and seaboards looking at water from the Caulfield. The options, for instance, that are being looked at include additional and deeper bores, which would also look at recycled water, and other options.
We've got a number of other options, but obviously the studies are reviewing. Those are the early ones.
Okay, because I know there's been talk in the community around council support or government support around water tanks. Is that something that we're looking at?
Through you, we look at that separately. We are looking at a program with the joint organisation to look at support for water tanks, either securing external funding or securing offset funding in order to incentivise residents to install.
Is there any further questions, Councillor Wright?
Through you, Mr Mayor, just with regard to the desalination reverse osmosis, has there been any presumably you know where the salt, the excess salt that's removed, will go back. How's that to be disposed of?
Brilliant, Mayor. The detailed planning and approvals that council is required to get deals with that issue, and as I understand it, looks at dispersing it.
That's correct. Yeah. Rather than having a single point of discharge and concentrating the salinity returning back into the river, they use a dispersion method that obviously reduces the amount of volume of salinity in any given one part of the river. And as I was saying, the report that comes from consultants as we develop the approvals for the plant will address the measures to not only practically provide that solution, but to monitor and make sure that there's obviously no recurring issues as well.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further questions, I am looking for a mover. Not happy to move. Second, Councillor Turner. Look, I'd just like to, I've got just, we're so lucky actually to receive that amount of rain. That was a massive concern for us as a community to actually have to be in that position where we were looking at a reverse osmosis. Hopefully we won't be doing that. I think, it's very, very important for us now to look at all those options about how we save water right across the Shire. I think it was great to see the response from the community about when we did get into that point of a level 4 water restriction, that we actually seen a drop in water use, which is the first time since I've been a councillor that we put water restrictions on and it hasn't gone up. It's actually that water usage hasn't gone up; it actually went down. So I think the community's got that message very strongly. I know corporate quarries now gone on to level 4, so we're a long way out of out of the forest yet. But we are certainly looking at other options. I think that there is a number of ways that we can continue to save water. and we need to look better at how we manage our river and our catchments into the future, so that we ensure that we do have that clean drinking water supply. So I think this will be an ongoing thing. It's great to get these reports from council, and it's great to get that rain, and let's hope that that continues for us. I will now put it. All those in favour? Okay, that's unanimous. And we need to put okay, so we're now going to go back to item 10.3, which is a report on the feedback from the public exhibition of the concept design for the proposed local philanthropic gift of public art for Dorrigo, and we have two speakers to that. So, okay, so the first speaker is Richard Reeves, and he's speaking for the item. So Richard here. Okay, Richard. So if you come forward, Richard, to there. So I'd just like to remind people too that we have now, as people have expressed that they want to speak to an item, we have also asked people to abide by the council code of conduct in terms of the language that they use when they are talking for or against this proposal. So you have 5 minutes. If you need more than that, I'll have to stop and ask the councillors to extend that. We do that on many occasions if you need more than 5 minutes. So if you have 5 minutes, you use on the clock, but I'll give you a nod about half a minute later. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to address council. I'm speaking in favour of the water cloud project that is proposed for Dorrigo. My name is Richard Reeves. I've been a resident of Dorrigo for the last 15 years, and currently I'm the president of the Dorrigo Arts Council, and I was also a member of the selection committee considering this project. I'm also a qualified visual artist. The Arts Council of Dorrigo fully supports the water cloud project. The project was announced at the annual general meeting of the council in October of last year, and subsequently emails were sent to all members explaining the project and the facts of the project. Mostly since that time, we've received very positive comments about the project. I was a member of the Arts and Cultural Committee for the Bellingen Shire back in 2014, when the arts and when the public art plan was commissioned by the council, and Creative Road were engaged to produce that plan. The plan included a recommendation that there be major public art sculptures in each of the major towns in the Shire, namely Dorrigo, Bellingen and Urunga. I think that the public art plan showed that the Bellingen Shire Council is a forward-thinking, creative and a council like the other progressive councils in the state who are looking to the future and the benefit of public art. The Water Cloud project is consistent with the art plan, and I think that's very important to remember. Nick Wright, a local resident, has generously commissioned Creative Road to produce a plan for a major art work in Dorrigo, and that is the genesis of the Water Cloud project. The benefits to Dorrigo. First of all, Stuart Green, the artist that was commissioned to or selected by the selection committee to produce the artwork, is a very experienced sculpture artist. and has major public art in cities and towns in Australia. The water cloud sculpture will encourage tourists, and that is the whole purpose of the project. It will encourage tourists to stop and explore the town. At the moment, tourists tend to go to the Rainforest Centre, Dangar Falls, but very seldom spend much time in town. So the water cloud project will give them something to also explore. Currently, the project is in the development design stage, and Stuart Green, the artist, will be required to meet all the statutory and environmental requirements, and also addressed other community concerns. Once constructed, the project will be low maintenance. It will have subtle lighting with LED lights, which will not only be low impact, but it will also be designed to turn off when street lights are turned off at night time. Tourism is a major industry for Dorrigo, as it is for the rest of the Bellingen Shire. This project is vital to the tourism industry. Thank you. And it will promote tourism in the area, which is also was already recognised as an area of creativity. This is not an initiative of the Arts Council. It fully supports, the Arts Council fully supports the project, and we believe that Dorrigo is very lucky to have a philanthropic gift that Nick Wright is proposing. It will enhance Dorrigo's reputation as a vibrant, creative and progressive area.
Richard, do you need an extra bit of time?
Yes.
I'm happy to give it to you. Okay, so can I've got to move from Councillor Fenton, second by Councillor Wright. Chairman, all those in favour? Okay, you can have you've got another 5 minutes if you need it.
I won't need that amount.
No, that's right.
So the Arts Council looks forward to the Council's approval of this project, because we think it's vital for Dorrigo. With the bushfires and the drought, everybody knows that the tourism industry has taken a beating in the last little while. This project will enhance that tourism for the area, and therefore the general well-being of the area. It is consistent with the Bellingen's Shire's public art plan, and therefore we believe that the council should recommend the project go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. So I'll just ask you to stay there, and if there's any questions from the councillors, I'll let that know. So I've got Councillor Jenkins.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. You made reference to the Dorrigo, Bellingen's, I should say, Shire Council Public Art Plan 2014, and you had some involvement with that.
Yes.
That plan refers to stakeholder engagement, but it doesn't actually detail what that stakeholder engagement was. From your involvement with that plan, could you enlighten us on what that engagement was?
Well, I'm talking basically from the point, from the position of being president of the Arts Council, and we put articles in the paper outlining all the facts of the project and making it quite clear as to how the project came about and how it was going to proceed.
Perhaps I'll take that a little step further. Was there a formal public consultation process adopted in the formation of that plan?
That's not for me to arrange.
I'd just like to remind you, Councillor Jenkins, that if we can just leave those, if there's questions for the staff, for the technical staff, then I think that can be asked after.
Oh, the gentleman did indicate he was involved in the preparation of the plan, so I thought he may have some knowledge of that process.
Yeah, he's not under, we're not giving him he's not in court.
That's all right, I'll hold it for the council staff.
So I think we can ask him questions about his involvement in the statements he's made about support for that, but whether the process, what the council staff will talk about process. So let's just make sure that we are asking questions that are relative to.
All right, well, I do have another question for him then, or two questions actually. He made reference to the streetlights going off at night. Maybe that's a question for council as well. But you also made reference that the artwork would encourage tourists. Could you elaborate on how that would encourage tourists?
Well, we live on Waterfall Way, and the attractions on Waterfall Way are largely the Rainforest Centre in Dorrigo, the Dangar Falls in Dorrigo. It will encourage tourists to come through town and actually stop in town as another feature for them to look and enjoy.
And just one more, if I may. How does the sculpture itself actually reflect Dorrigo's heritage?
I think it reflects Dorrigo as a forward-looking town, but also the heritage, I think, is it is a water cloud. It relates to water in the area, which is waterfalls and high rainfall, and I think it has that connection.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And I'd just like to remind council, whether we're the people speaking for or against, that people have that right to have an opinion, and that's what we allow people to do public presentations about. I think that's what we need to make sure that we are respectful, that people have come forward and have expressed their opinion about why they think this will be a benefit or why it won't work. And I think that's what we need, that's what this process is about. So thank you, Richard. So the next speaker is Sandra Pitkin, and she's speaking for the item herself. So Sandra, it's the same deal, so 5 minutes if you need more. I'll give you that call at half a minute, and I'll ask you to sit there and answer any questions.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak this morning. My name is Sandra Pitkin, as said, and I am a resident of Dorrigo, belong to the Arts Council, and my profession is as a sculptor. So, water cloud is an amazing. Try. Yes, they are. Okay. Water cloud is an amazing opportunity for Dorrigo Plateau and the Bellingen Shire. As Richard has spoken of the foundations of the project, I wish to focus on the selection, the artist, and the concept. Creative Road was engaged by Nick Wright to oversee this wonderful project and has been in contact with Council from the outset to ensure transparency of the process. This began with identifying 10 suitably experienced local and national public artists to be considered for selection by the selection committee. 4 artists were then chosen and were invited to prepare a detailed proposal. The basis for selection being the artistic vision, quality and originality, the impact of the concept and its ability to capture an audience, the response to the site, suitability to context and durability. As a local sculptor, I was privileged to be one of the artists chosen, but withdrew due to unforeseen circumstances. I was, however, appointed to the selection committee with other local artists, Nick Wright and the Mayor, Dominic King. 3 artists presented their concepts to the committee. Each work was exciting, different, and fulfilled the requirements. After much discussion, Stuart Green's Water Cloud was selected unanimously, as it offered a bold, contemporary work to resonate with the area's aspirations of a creative and vibrant town. Stuart Green's sculptural practice has focused on making and installing public art for the last 25 years, both nationally and internationally. His sculptures augment public
places in many major cities and create intimate areas in hospitals, schools and gardens. Not only does he have a creative mind, but has an experienced team to enable his concepts to be realised. This experience with public art ensures the making and installation of this work will be professional and the process exacting. Stuart's interest in the changing natural world is manifest in the concept and structure of this artwork. The pattern and rhythm of his sculpture have an underlying reference to natural forms and energies. This focus applies to the concept of water cloud and also to Dorrigo as a whole. The Dorrigo area is known for its natural environment, particularly as a water place. Waterfalls, rainforests and clouds bring people to the area, either as residents or as tourists. Therefore, an artwork relating to water, centrally placed, is an ideal symbol of the town. Stuart's concept extends to the flow of water, the energy and the water cycle. The sculpture elevated above the streetscape, an indicator of where clouds form. The addition of gentle illumination at night brings another dimension, allowing the work to extend its beauty and appeal. To quote Stuart from his proposal, "I suspect the way in which we relate to water, and particularly bodies of moving water, is that it is on a journey that is much more than a distance travelled. We are observers of one short moment in its life, and the water will carry on." Water cloud conveys this cycle to the viewer, offering an indicator of Dorrigo also moving on a journey.
Sandy, would you like some extra
A
time?
little bit, please.
So, Councillor Carter, second Councillor Benson, all those in favour?
Thank you. While Dorrigo has a different history to that which is evident now, the town has always adapted to change. Tourism is now an important part of change for Dorrigo and the Bellingen Shire. This contemporary artwork is designed to resonate with the area's future aspirations, to expand possibilities within the town and the whole of Bellingen Shire. Water cloud is an exceptional opportunity for Bellingen Council, for the township of Dorrigo and the Bellingen Shire. For a small town to be the beneficiary of a gift of major artwork by an internationally renowned artist is an unprecedented and extremely rare opportunity. Therefore, I hope Bellingen Council will support this exciting project to move ahead to the next stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Is there any questions, councillors?
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Okay, councillor, so what I will open this up to questions. I know there is quite a lot in this report. And we do have Alison Patterson here, and thank you, Alison. I know this has been not the most pleasing thing, the job that you have to do within council, but it's been a tough one. And I think the passion in our community is something that we're proud about. And, you know, we understand difference and we understand difference of opinion, and we need to respect that. So I have Alison here if there's some questions that people would like to ask. So from Councillor Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have three questions actually.
Okay, yeah.
The first was one of the ones that I asked before in relation to the preparation of the public art plan and what public consultation was involved in that process.
Through you, Mr Mayor,
it was placed on public exhibition. It was, we got responses from a variety of people to that public art plan. Most were in favour. I don't recall anyone being against the public art plan at the time. It was out in the pub. We had the Arts and Cultural Committee at the time with representatives from across the Shire, and they were heavily involved in the process of developing that plan. Regional Arts Mid North Coast gave some commentary. There wasn't any negative commentary on the plan, but it was placed on exhibition and brought back to council with those responses.
And essentially, that was just the establishment of the plan. It wasn't actually to just make a determination as to what was or wasn't going to be constructed, as this motion relates to.
Are you saying did it specifically? The plan proposed that there be a public artwork in each town, an iconic work in each town, and the one for Dorrigo proposed an elevated concept.
The other question relates to the street lights. There was made comment that the lights in the artwork would go off when the street lights are turned off at night. Are the street lights turned off at night?
It sounded like he was mentioning that it could be on a time delay similar to the lights as they go off in the morning, and that the artwork would go off in that. I think that's
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's essentially that what John Fife is explaining is that they're programmable. So if there's a concern about the length of time that the lights are on, they can be programmed to go off at a certain time of day or night. One of the concerns expressed about lighting, though, was interference with the night sky, but the lights are actually pointing down, not up. And where it's proposed to be located between two buildings, those buildings actually are higher than the sculpture. And so in terms of the light would actually be concentrated down into the street.
There's an additional question actually just from that. Any of the buildings that is proposed to attach this sculpture to heritage buildings?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there's no proposal to attach a sculpture to the building. The proposal is to attach the sculpture to 3 posts in a triangular sort of arrangement. And no, the nearest heritage building there is the Heritage Hotel. There is the monument is, well, I don't really call that a building, but the monument, and the clock. The clock, however, has been refurbished in the last 3 years because it wasn't working. So it's not in its original form, and its listing may need to be reviewed. It's 85 metres, as I understand it, from the monument to the proposed location of the sculpture.
And Mr. Mayor, the last question I have relates to some correspondence which I believe most, if not all, the councillors have received. In it, it's stated that in one instance anyway, Mr. Wright apparently had visions of a different sculpture at a different location. But based on information provided by Mr. Wright to the author of the email, it stated that that wasn't favoured by council. I just wonder if someone could enlighten us on what those other alternatives were and why they weren't favoured by council.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, I can't enlighten you. I can't enlighten you. I mean, there were a variety of sites were proposed. It has to be on public. It was proposed for public land, but I'm not aware of what that is. I'm sorry, Councillor.
Okay, is there any further questions? So I've got Councillor Wright Turner and Councillor Smith.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm just wanting to clarify the recommendation notes that there are, you know, a number of aspects that still have questions around them with regard to the sculpture. And essentially we're deciding today through this recommendation to refer these back, you know, for further consideration and then see what comes forward. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Tensley.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I think public art's a really important thing to grow as a community. My feeling from a lot of the controversial nature of discussing this particular project is that there's only been a small number of visual images that aren't maybe the best way to get people to understand what the project will look and feel like. And I don't know if that's just me, but I'm feeling like, and I know I said this really early on, I'm feeling like a model of what it will actually look and feel like would be really beneficial. I would like to add, I think, to make this, to bring this to a space where we can make a solid decision about it. I think that would be something for the philanthropist to consider as a further step in the process that he's obviously got to go through around the engineering stuff.
So is there a question there, Councillor?
Is that a reasonable thing to add? I guess is my question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry. Yes.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, at the moment we don't have a move on executive. So the council is of the mind to want to ask for a model as part of that. We would add that to as a part, perhaps a new part. 6, and then 6 becomes 7, 7 becomes 8.
Okay. Yeah. I don't want to add that as this is what we're requiring. I'm just wanting that to be communicated, and I did actually communicate that directly with Nick Wright. That I have a feeling that will help the discussion proceed, because Create has a bad small diagram and that's it, a mocked photo, and that's it. That's what most people have engaged with, or they've engaged with what's on the Career Sun. So that's my feeling, that I would like to add something about further consideration to, because when I look at Stuart Green's work online, it's absolutely stunning. There's stunning stuff there, and that's not what we've been shown the potential of, I don't think, from what I've seen anyway, unless I've missed some amazing visuals somewhere. Yeah, can we add some consideration of that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that there have been some additional visuals provided Friday last week, but that it was clearly too late in the process to be able to distribute. So it's reasonable to ask.
I think that if it comes down to us making a call on something that will majorly change the face of the town, we're going to need to see better what it looks like, to be honest. If that's what it's going to come down to.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Fenn, are you wanting to move a motion with an amendment in it?
I guess so.
Could I suggest, and correct me if I'm wrong, that at the end of 6, on your screen there, we have.
I've just still got questions, so can you just wait? Can you just wait? Because I've still got a question from Councillor Hugh.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
And can I just remind the councillors that we are at a stage here of asking questions. We are not moving the motion. We are not speaking for or against the motion at the moment. We are asking questions to the staff about issues that are in there that we don't understand. So can we make sure that they are questions rather than statements, and then there will be an opportunity for people to speak for or against this recommendation or a new motion that's put up. Councillor Jenkins.
Just probably contrary to what you just said, I'd just like to congratulate Mr. Wright on his 80th birthday last week, first of all. But also too to state that I'm not against public art, but I just do have reservations in terms of the appropriateness at the moment of what I understand this particular concept of the Dorigo.
Okay, so if there is no questions, which is if you're asking something you want an answer for, I'll now move on to the next stage. And so we are now looking for a mover for this motion, recommendation. or we're looking for an alternative motion. So councillor Benson, you are moving a motion.
I'm making an addition to
Three.
point 6, I believe.
Through Mr Mayor, procedure, there is no motion, there is a recommendation, so if councillor Fenton wanted to add some words to the recommendation and then move it, it would be a motion.
Would you want to add some words to that?
So maybe something along the lines of including the potential to explore other options and
would you like some support there? And the potential for the provision of a model of the proposed artwork.
or further visual
And a
representation.
model and, you're up there? Provision of a model
Like a digital model. Yeah, digital.
and or a model or and further visual representations. Visual, of the artwork. Councillor Fenton, would you like to amend that in a few ways?
Right, that's great, thank you. And I'm happy to move that.
Okay, so we need a seconder for that motion. Councillor Harrison. Would you agree to that motion, councillor Benson?
Yes, through you, Mr Mayor, I think as the members of the Arts Council said, this is a great opportunity for our Shire and our region. So we owe it to the process to continue this process and see how feasible it is. So we need to do this next step. We need to endorse this next bit of work to follow that through.
Is there a speaker against the recommendation? Is there a speaker for? Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. First of all, I'd like to thank Alison and her co-workers for the amount of work you have put in to this recommendation. It shouldn't go unnoticed. And I know there's been an enormous stress on you being a local, as it has been on me. So thank you very much. I can only fully support this recommendation simply because of the potential it brings to Dorrigo and the whole of the Bellingen Shire. And once installed, it would go even further than that. We often hear the comment that when the design came out for the Opera House, nobody liked it. The French didn't want the Eiffel Tower. And we can go on and on. They didn't want Federation Square. They didn't like the design of Federation Square in Melbourne. But what do people do now? They go and visit these iconic things, and mainly because of the bad publicity that went with it. Bad publicity is quite often the greatest thing that could happen to anything. And I believe that would happen with this installation of artworks. It does fall into the plan, our art plan, developed some years ago. But the greatest thing that will happen is it will revitalise Dorrigo as a town. Dorrigo, some of the businesses are really, really struggling now because of what's happened over the last few months. And regardless of whether we like it or not, tourists are going to be so important for the future of this whole Shire. And it comes in all shapes and forms. I thank the donor for his wonderful, or giving us this wonderful opportunity to accept such an exceptional piece of artwork. And I know very well that he will work forward with council to get this proposal and all the requirements completed. I hope that my fellow councillors will support this, not just for Dorrigo, but for the whole of the Shire. Thank you.
Yeah, Alison.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I would like to say that I needed to table some documents. We were limited by the number of attachments, and there was a large volume of submissions, and some of the people definitely did not want to be identified publicly. and it was unclear whether people knew that they could be identified publicly on what their position was. So all of the submissions, I have a copy of all the submissions here, and the petition, the over 800 signature petition here, and I am tabling those documents. So I will bring them forward when this motion has been dealt with.
Is there a speaker against? I would like to speak for this this motion now. And what this motion, I'll just remind people of what this motion says is that we need to have some things ticked off before this comes back to council, before we actually go ahead with this proposal. That is in the recommendation. So what we are saying here is that, that there's some other steps for us to make before we approve the sculpture. That's my understanding of where we are. And what I will say about that in terms of, this is more about getting some things such as the essential energy recommendations or the works that they need to get covered before we say yes. We can't say yes to something and then essential energy comes back and says, no, you can't do it. So there's a couple of stuff, there's some stuff with the RMS in terms of the distance. I think Councillor Fenton's suggestion of a model is a really, really good idea, because I know, and I've heard very loudly from a lot of people up in Dorrigo, that some of the stuff that has been spoken about this public art has been not true. A lot of the stuff that's been said about what that's going to look like with flashing lights and it's made of aluminium, all those things are not true. So I think, to be fair to this process, that we need to take a step back and we will re-look at this, obviously in the March meeting. We will hopefully be there, where we can. So that's what this recommendation says. In saying that also, though, I would like to really acknowledge the work that Nick has done around this, and the generosity of someone who has done something not for his own personal gain, but something for the community that he has lived in for a very, very long time. It's not a statue of Nick. I mean, if it was, then we could have a question about that. But this is an idea. This is an idea that will bring people to Dorrigo, whether people like it or not. That's what public art does. People will come and see it. So what I'm hearing very loudly, and I have heard that from the Dorrigo councillors as well, is what we need as many draw cards as possible to get to people to see how amazing Dorrigo is. This is another step. This is an opportunity for people to come there at night as well. And there is so many attractions around Dorrigo. One of the hardest things about Dorrigo is it's such an amazing place that people go, I'm going to the waterfalls, I'm going to there, I'm going to there, I haven't got time to visit the town. This is going to be another thing, and I commend Nick, for actually thinking about other people and businesses and the community in Dorrigo that needs as much help as possible. It is not the first time that we've had petitions put up that have not been giving the full picture of what's there. And I think what Councillor Fenton has put up is a sensible option, and that we will be back to discuss this further in the next meeting. But we're all very much clearer on what it looks like and what that process is going to be. And I think that's what we need to do as a council. We have to go through due process. We have to make sure that we are ticking all those boxes so that we can get something in place. Is there any other speakers? Councillor Carter.
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Carter.
I was a little bit sceptical when I first read the proposal, but having a chance, I phoned Nick and we made contact, and I went up and had a coffee with him. He answered a lot of my questions. We had a look at the site, where it was, how it was going to be, the height, and after meeting with him, I walked away very positive, and it's a great thing, and I thank Nick very much.
Okay, so Councillor Benton, do you want to write a reply there? So we have a mover and a seconder. I will put it. All those in favour? Okay, that's unanimous. Okay, so I'm just going to read out, just for clarity, what this recommendation is. It's been adopted. Okay, so point one is that we note the submissions received in relation to the concept design for the proposed local philanthropic gift of public art for Dorrigo. Two, that we note the submissions in the majority express a range of concerns with proposed location and or the form or theme of the proposed sculpture in Hickory Street. Three, that we note that the proposed placement site on Hickory Street, Dorrigo, for the proposed concept design for the sculpture entitled Water Cloud has been assessed as involving risks due to the non-frangible, in brackets rigid and not easily collapsible nature of the structure. The requirements of the Australian standards for roads, for clearance widths in the 50 kilometre zone for the clear zone for passing vehicles, approximately 1.2 metres from the edge of the roadway and the centre line for non-frangible structure. The safety need for a barrier around the non-frangible structure at a distance from the structure. Point four, that we note the objection from Essential Energy pending provision of a certification by a person with qualifications designated by Essential Energy. That we note the maintenance and ongoing costs associated with this proposal. Six, that we refer the matters 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. There's one missing there because that's who's the one council.
That's on this.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Above 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 above, back to the philanthropist for a detailed response back to council, including the potential to explore other options and the potential for the provision of a model or further visual representations of the artwork. That any response from the philanthropist be brought to council by way of a further report. So thank you. So that's been adopted. So obviously there's some more work to be done on this. Okay, thank you. So we're now going to move to item 11.1.
Do you want me to announce? You want me to announce what? Yes. What is it? What's housing strategy.
Thanks.
Okay, so we are now on to item 11.1, which is the Bellingen Shire local housing strategy. And we do have Daniel Bennett here. So I will open it up for questions if you. Sorry, I'll just take a step backwards. We have two speakers. So the first speaker we have is Dennis Atkinson. I'm pretty sure Dennis knows the drill here. You've got 5 minutes, Dennis. If you need extra time, we will give you. Oh, okay, good. And if we could get you to stay there after you speak, just so that if there's any questions for us.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, councillors. Firstly, I think should be some great congratulations on achieving the action plan. It's a very comprehensive document and will go a long way to looking at development over the next 10 years. I'm involved with 3 of the individual recommendations, 2 as a consultant and 1 as affecting myself. The 3 recommendations, I concur with the recommendations as put by staff. They relate to the Riddell land holdings on South Arm Road, where we're to use the growth management strategy from 2007. Also 975 Darkwood Road, which is a dwelling potential. Council's done some additional research there and found the old policy which supports that application. And thirdly, it's the community title for local occupancies. And that affects myself and something that I've been trying to get for probably about 25 years here. I think it's a good step forward. I just hope that council devotes enough resources to the planning section to achieve what's in the action plan. So nice and brief.
Thank you, Dennis. So I've got a question from Councillor Fenton.
Mr. Mayor. Dennis, when you talk about MOs, you're referring to the more of a smooth transition to community title? Is that
Yes.
Is there any further questions for Dennis? Okay, thank you, Dennis.
Yep.
The next speaker is Kerry Pearce. Speaking for the motion or the recommendation. Sorry. Kerry, 5 minutes if you need more. I'll give you a bit of a warning when there's half a minute left.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I might need just a couple of Dennis's minutes or seconds. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Gumbaynggirr people, who are the traditional owners and custodians of this wonderful land that we're all blessed to live on. I'd also like to acknowledge councillors and council staff and my colleagues and the other people who are here in the gallery today, and also Polis Plan, who travelled up from Sydney for this meeting. Polis are very interested in the eco-village action that's in the action plan, and we had a very positive meeting with them about that yesterday. I'm here to speak on behalf of the Housing Action Group in support of this strategy. We really commend Council on the strategy. When Council approved the draft for release, I described the strategy as smart and strategic, and that still stands. We particularly want to recognise the work of Luke Perry, Daniel Bennett and Rebecca Jardim. The rigour and the work that has gone into this really needs to be recognised, and we thank you. We also thank Council for your commitment to genuine consultation and collaboration all through this process over the last 2 years. It's been a lot of work. You've genuinely asked community for input, you've listened and you've acted, and it's been a pleasure to work with you over that time. The local housing strategy is a roadmap to do whatever we can locally to make sure our Shire remains inclusive and diverse, and not just a beautiful coastal and hinterland retreat for the wealthy. I think we can be collectively proud that together we're trying to do what we can to get the right balance for sustainable and responsible growth in a way that preserves our Shire and the environment for all people of all incomes and life circumstances. Our group worked hard over the public exhibition period, and we're pleased to see that most of our feedback has been incorporated into the final documents. This includes holding off on actions to increase housing supply until we know we have the water security that we need to support desired levels of growth, something we've all been really thinking about over the last few months. Planning for more homes for low to middle income working people so that they're not progressively priced out of the area, and strengthening biodiversity actions. In particular, we're thrilled to see that there's in principle support in the documents to explore a partnership with our group through the possible support of a housing hub. I want to make it clear that we're not asking council to fully fund this hub. We'd like to work together with you as partners and jointly apply for grants. Some council support and in-kind help would be very gratefully received, and we hope we have the opportunity to talk about that in the coming months. Our vision is that the hub will be a place where locals can get advice and support as they make important housing decisions related to this strategy. For example, some older couples and also older women living alone in 3 or 4 bedrooms have often approached our group to say that they're on a large block, to say they're interested in subdividing, they'd like to build something small that they can maintain and live in much more easily age in place. But it's a big deal to do something like that for most of us. For many of us, we'd only do something like that once in our lives. And that's the sort of thing that the Housing Hub would be able to provide an advice and support to help local residents while they're exploring these options and going through these processes in a way that council as a regulator just can't. The hub could also be a great resource to provide information and tools and advice for disaster recovery and fire and flood preparedness, which you were talking about earlier. Whilst we're very supportive of the strategy overall, there is an important change that we wish to raise and we appreciate you considering in this meeting. The draft strategy proposed 40% landscape control in concert with the reduction of the minimum block size in town precincts to 500 square metres. Our group was strongly supportive of the 40% because we saw it as a protective factor that would lead people to build smaller dwellings, which we need, whilst preserving privacy and green space. We saw significant environmental benefits in relation to biodiversity and water management. We also recognised that this was a simpler, more streamlined approach than the current controls in the Shire. Thank you. We understand that feedback has been mixed and that there's concern that this control might limit the potential for infill development. Whilst disappointed, we understand that council wishes to review the landscape control as a result of the feedback to make sure that we end up with something that's workable. However, it's not really clear to us from the draft what the intention is in relation to the landscape control. None of us want to end up with dense infill or in a series of mini McMansions.
Okay, Kerry, I'm just going to have to set 5 minutes. So, Councillor Wright Turner, Councillor Carter, second, all those in favour?
Thank you. We ask that council consider strengthening the actions in the action plan related to the landscaping controls to ensure that the 40% approach outlined in the draft, which was released for consultation, is the starting point for further modelling. Of course, this needs to be viable for different dwelling sizes and yields, and further modelling may indicate that the 40% needs to be adjusted down or varied in certain circumstances. And reading between the lines, it looks like this is the intent, but it would be reassuring for it to be clearer, and that could easily be modified with some text in the action plan. Lastly, so thank you, Dennis, for your extra time.
Pleasure.
I'd like to advise council that the Bellingen Nambucca Affordable Housing Action Group has wound up. We've incorporated as an association and become the Housing Matters Action Group. We remain a grassroots, politically unaligned, community-led group, at this point entirely unfunded and based on the efforts of a number of volunteers, but we've incorporated because we're here for the long haul. And we hope to continue to work closely with council as we build a partnership and find ways to turn the vision of the local housing strategy into practical reality. Thank you.
Is there any questions for Kerry?
Great.
Okay, so I'm looking for a mover.
A movie amender?
If you move a motion.
Yes, thank you. We'll get this process by the end of the term.
So, Okay, so could you outline the motion, please, councillor?
So I have emailed this to Beck. Well, that's a good question. Perhaps I can read it and you can advise whether.
And then we can.
Yep, so it's to add that the action plan, action 1.2E, 2.1B and 6.2 be amended to include the following text. That the 40% control proposed in the draft local housing strategy will be reviewed to determine feasibility across a mix of dwelling sizes and yield. This may result in an adjustment down or a less streamlined approach to ensure privacy and environmental benefits while retaining development feasibility.
I'm just going to get a point of clarification if I can from Luke. Is that something that is missing?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, and Councillor Patrick, I understand the amendment is based upon is to ensure that 40% is the starting point in terms of our further review. So obviously the actions to 1.2E, 2.1B and 6.2 are around the landscape area control, and we have an amendment to what would be the development control plan product. And at the moment we have said that we need to undertake a more detailed analysis to ensure that we come to a balanced outcome in terms of making sure that we maintain the character of the area and all of the green space and the things the community obviously value. It was always certainly from a council staff point of view our intent to use 40% as a starting point, and obviously there will be, it may be very well a fluctuation one way or the other, or it may be that 40% is the starting point. I don't think there is, I don't think there is any issues with that as a starting point. I think that's the last thing to clarify any potential concerns, and also I think part 2 of the recommendation allows us to make any changes following that process.
So,
Through you, Mr. Mayor, you may want to add just you may want to add just a loop in part 2 of the recommendation that could be utilised at the conclusion of that process. Just not coming back and forth. Because what this may very well do, this part 1, will require an amendment to the strategy document and the action plan, which will require us to enact part 2, then delegate the authority to the general manager to make minor amendments. So it may be we think it's worthwhile putting that in part 1 as well, or we can leave it as a standalone authority there. Yes.
You can just read it.
So, just to cover back in terms of, it will be amending, I would leave it blanket as amending the housing strategy, because that encompasses all of those documents, including the action plan, so that we have a complete document that reflects those amendments. Okay. So in the words action plan, it may be better to replace that with the local Bellingen Shire local housing strategy.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. That's a 10.
Can I also just question the published business papers refer to the original recommendation, point 2 delegates authority to the deputy general manager. Now on screen it says the general manager. Is that that's a conscious?
Yeah, that was a
Okay.
typo, so it's been adjusted in what you can see on the screen.
Through Mr. Mayor, pardon me, Councillor Fenton. We're just amending number 2 to refer back to number 1 as well, because number 2 results to adopt the Bellingen Shire local housing strategy, and we've just got noting 1 above. And we'll fix that formatting.
Yes, that's good.
We've got 1, 2, 2, 3.
Yeah, we'll fix that.
Are you happy with that? Are you happy with that?
Yes.
Okay, so we've got a mover where we now need a second of that motion.
Could I just have a point of clarification?
Yes, you can, Kev.
That we get some clarification on the conflict of interest that was put in on this matter. Can you just explain any outcomes?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have, and for the benefit of anyone who wasn't here at the beginning, we had 2 disclosures of interest from 2 councillors. One was from Councillor Jen Benton, who disclosed a non-pecuniary, less significant conflict on the basis that she intermittently attends meetings of the Bellingen Board of Housing Authority.
Yep.
And the second one was from Councillor Wright Turner, again, non-pecuniary lessons for the reason that she lives on an MO.
So their rights are able to vote and stay in the meeting?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is a matter for each councillor to determine.
Okay.
Each councillor must consider each report in the context of any potential conflict of interest. There are 3 categories. One is pecuniary, and if there is a pecuniary declaration, the councillor declaring that must leave the chamber and take no part in discussion and voting. If it's a non-pecuniary significant conflict, it's recommended that the councillor leaves the chamber and takes no part in discussion and voting. And if it's non-pecuniary less significant, the councillor may choose to remain in the chamber and participate in the discussion and the voting. But it is a matter for each councillor. The council staff cannot give advice as to whatever their particular interest is.
I'm quite happy to leave it up to each individual councillor and make their own decision.
Yeah, that's how it has to be.
Okay.
Okay, so I've got
Thank you.
Councillor Benton as the mover of the motion. I'm still looking for a second. I'm happy to be the seconder.
Councillor Jenkins.
Oh, Councillor Jenkins did.
Oh, I did before.
Okay, Councillor Benton, you'd like to speak to the motion?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. I think just to reiterate what has already been said, that this process has been a really great example of how government can work with community and how community can not spend all their time pointing their finger at various government levels and hoping things to change or more money to appear, but to actually get very engaged and be very clear about what community needs, because community knows that best. So this has been a great example of that partnership working to make what is essentially a state government process, which is quite dry, interesting and thorough, and I think the term you used, Kerry, was rigorous. I think there's obviously the planning system's not perfect. I mean, it's been described as a process for rich people to get richer generally, the New South Wales planning system, but it also means that anyone who wants to make housing is a developer, whether it's one house in a lifetime or 10 or hundreds. And we need to use that tool that we have to the best, and the tools that we have to the best effect that we can. I think it's great that our community recognises that housing affordability and housing variety and the sustainability of our homes are crucial for all of us. And that's why I don't consider that I have a particular pecuniary interest from going to those meetings. I've been there to consider, to hear firsthand what's happening for people, and also to be, to try and keep up to date with what's happening in to help keep that group up to date with what's happening in council. Yeah, and obviously this strategy is so much bigger than affordable housing, which was the beginnings of that community group, and now that's also got a broader gamut. I think it's very exciting, the idea of being proactive with members of our community about how to support affordable housing, how to support sustainable development, because there's a wealth of information out there, but how to actually do it as an individual is really, really challenging. And all of us face all those constraints, legal and financial and time, when we're doing those kind of important undertakings in our lives. So I think this is an amazing document that will serve our community. I know that we often refer to Byron Bay as a good example of where we don't want to be, and you know, for us to that amendment about just keeping an eye on the landscape size stuff is really, really important, because what we've seen in Byron is people have ended up killing what they valued about where they've moved to. And I think we're all so aware of that here. We're not there. We haven't done that to this Shire yet, and we easily could. So to have as many checks and balances and statements of what we value in our planning system that we can is one of the best things that we can do to try and preserve what we love. We're also in a place where climate's changing quite rapidly. The sort of amount of water which could fall on our homes and properties in any 1 hour now is going to get higher and higher. You know, that the idea of making sure that we're ready to capture that water, that we're ready to let a lot of that water go into the groundwater, which maintains our town water supply. You know, all of those old school environmental ideas about how to build sustainable development are only going to get more and more important. They're not going to get less. You know, it's great the stuff about water security is in there, because again, there's been whole communities that have developed and developed and developed like water magically grows on trees or falls down waterfalls. And we've seen that it doesn't always do that. For the first time in this Shire, we've seen that it doesn't always do that. Australia has a big problem. We have one of the most unaffordable housing systems in the world. This isn't what's happening in other parts of the world. This is something unusual that we've created here. We also have really low quality housing, and we have a sort of a high proportion of very unsustainable housing and living styles. We're using more planets than we've got in our lifestyles in Australia. So for the community to so strongly say we value what we have, and we value those, we value everyone having a home, we value everyone having a good quality home, we value sustainability in the way we develop our homes. It's great to see that reflected from the community and in this plan. So I really encourage everyone to, even though there's little bits and pieces that still need work, it's an amazing document, and we need to get on with the bits that do work and on with that work to fix those other little bits.
Is there a speaker against? A speaker for? Harry?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. What has come out of this strategy plan for me is it identifies a whole range of issues. Not only has it identified the need for multiple housing choices, it identifies the surrounds as well, that fits in with the different community standards, as well as pathways, cycleways, vehicle parking, community facilities, public spaces, parks and gardens, and much, much more. The main concern I have in our community is our ageing population, pensioners. What happens to them when they can no longer look after their 2 and 4 bedroom homes on large parcels of land? Where do they go? If they wish to downsize, it normally means they're moving out of our area, leaving our neighbours and friends behind. Some may wish to move into aged care facilities, which also means moving out of our area. This issue needs to be prioritised under this plan as urgent. Other concerns I have with the strategy plan is that it has not been costed. Nowhere in this plan does it identify cost to council. I'm going to vote in favour of this recommendation, but I would like a commitment from council that before any funding, not including grant funding, be given to the affordable housing strategy plan, it comes back to this chamber for approval.
Do we have another speaker for? I want to take that opportunity to firstly thank Kerry and Rose and all the people that were involved in this initiative and taking ownership of something that has fallen to the role of local government, where maybe it shouldn't be our role to be managing housing, but we know that we are the closest form of government to community, and we know that we have a responsibility to ensure that the people within our Shire have a safe place to live and an affordable place to live. And the diversity of this region is something that we want to keep. We have three very, very different communities here. We all respect each other. We have our differences, but there is an understanding that there is vulnerable people within our community that need support around housing. And what we look like into the future is a very, very important question for Bellingen. So I also want to thank the staff that have done an amazing amount of work and won awards for our engagement with the community around this. This is one of the most difficult things of being a councillor, and we see that every meeting is trying to get community buy-in on what is happening. Because what we do experience is very low numbers turning out to consultations that we put out, and then a lot of people very upset with the process that we end up having because they don't feel like they've had their say. So I think this model has certainly been an example of how we get it right. It's been community driven. They have brought some amazing speakers in here to the forums that we have attended, and we've all been educated as councillors about what's out there, what the needs are, and what the future might look like. And we need to be thinking about that now more than ever, because there is so much uncertainty in our lives. One thing that we all need and appreciate is a roof over our heads and somewhere safe and a strong community to back us. So thank you so much again from the housing group, and thank you so much for the staff for this process. I think we are one of the leading councils in this country around trying to get this right. I take Councillor Carter's point about the funding, but that is something that we need to deal with. You know, if we were not pushing any incentives or initiatives that weren't funded, we wouldn't be doing anything. So this is the starting point for us. I think we can get it right. We are certainly looking at all those options to do it, and we've got some other some other housing issues to look in terms of our rural lands and also our business land. So this is the start of the process. This is a great step forward for us as a community, and once again, thank you so much for the people that have been involved in that. Councillor Fenton, did you need the right reply? Okay, so I'm going to put it. All those in favour? I'm actually going to call for a 15-minute break for morning tea, and then we'll come back at 11 o'clock to do the 11.2, which is the milestone pathway project. So we've got 16 minutes.
Good on you, Gary. Well.
10:58. And we have 4 speakers. The first speaker is Annette Rose, and she's speaking for the item we're on to. So if I could get Annette forward. Thanks, Annette. So you've got 5 minutes.
It probably won't take 5 minutes.
Okay, if you need extra time, we can I'll put that to the council. If you need extra time, that usually happens. And then we just ask you if you could remain seated after us, just if there's any questions from the council.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm a parent of a young adult with a severe disability from birth. I have lived in Maelstrom community for the past 40 years, and over that time I've endured many difficulties taking my son from our home in Rowley Street to walk down to our local shop to pick up our mail, or even going for a walk to the river or the beach. I have a Bachelor of Social Science degree, and I've worked in aged care as a divisional manager for years in the care sector of our organisation over 15 years, where a major part of my job was to arrange outings for the most vulnerable clients with disabilities and frail aged. Also, our First Nation people, the Gambundri people. I was unable to take clients out of Maelstrom for any recreation or to walk around to be able to enjoy the scenery for individual community members or the Gambundri people who wanted to pay respect to their past elders. As it didn't meet the safety requirements, and it definitely doesn't now with the increase of traffic using River Drive, especially over the holiday period. What concerns us as a community is disability discrimination, which occurs when a person is treated less favourably or not given the same opportunities as others in similar situations because of their disability. This is happening in our lovely little town of Maelstrom, with nowhere to walk safely along River Road, due to the fact there are no footpaths on either side of the road. One side, where the road is extremely narrow, is far too sloped in many places and is definitely not disability friendly to walk or push a wheelchair or ride a mobility scooter. On the riverside, where there is a little more room, you have to contend with tree roots, loose gravel, which is extremely dangerous when you are caring for someone with balance issues and is very unsteady on their feet, which could be of any age. Have you ever tried pushing a wheelchair or riding a mobility scooter on the grass, as it's nearly impossible to do? The Disability Discrimination Act of 1992 makes it unlawful to discriminate against a person in many areas of public life, including employment, education, getting or using services, and especially accessing public places because of their disability. The Disability Discrimination Act of 1992 covers people who have temporary or permanent disabilities. It extends to disabilities that people have had in the past and potential future disabilities, as well as disabilities that people are assumed to have. The Disability Discrimination Act in 1992 also makes it against the law to discriminate against someone because of their association with a person with a disability, and this is definitely happening at Maelstrom, with no appropriate footpaths anywhere within the town, except for one that leads from Alpendale Park up to the surf club. Direct disability discrimination happens when a person with a disability is treated less favourable than a person without that disability in the same or similar circumstances. Furthermore, some of us in the community feel this is happening within this community, especially when there are no safe access to get around the town. The Disability Discrimination Act 1992 states that places used by the public must be accessible to people with a disability. This applies to existing places as well as places under construction to comply with the Disability Discrimination Act of 1992. Existing places may need to be modified to be accessible, except where they would involve unjustifiable hardship. This means that every area facility open to the public should be open and available to people with a disability, especially where their safety is concerned. Persons with a disability should expect to enter and make uses of places used by the public if people without a disability can do so. I do know that this council is aware of the Disability Discrimination Act of 1992 because they have just upgraded the ramp at Maelstrom Community Hall due to the fact that not meeting the disability standards. And this could open
this could be open to someone suing them due to injuries. And this was done without any consultation within the community. So why haven't they commenced or even considered a pathway to accommodate the disability and frail aged in our lovely little town of Marston?
Thank you. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Benson?
I just want to say thank you. I mean, I know what your life probably feels like, and
Yeah.
it's partly mine as well. And I know that your time is probably really, really precious. So thank you for coming and sharing.
That's okay.
Thank you, Annette. So the next speaker is Roger Price, and Roger is also speaking for the item. So the same rules, Roger. You've got 5 minutes. If you need some more, I'll ask the council to extend that another 5 minutes. I'll give you a bit of a warning when you've got 30 seconds. So thank you to stay at 1 minute.
Thank you, Mayor King, and councillors, council officers, and the gallery. I think in Australia, in the last few years, we've become a nation of acceptance and also of understanding, and also in terms of tolerance. And I think in terms of when we look at the riverbanks in Australia, they're actually owned by the public, and everybody has access to them, and the river and other public areas, obviously. And so by understanding that, I think we need to look at who the stakeholders are in terms of this project that we're talking about at Marston. And the stakeholders certainly do include the residents of Marston, but it's a lot broader based than that. It includes everybody that actually has been visiting Marston and accessing the riverbank and the park. It includes all of those people that will in the future want to access those areas because it is a public area. So the stakeholders are wide and varied, and to determine what is actually going to happen there, then we need to understand who the stakeholders are. And we hear the voices of the residents, but I think we also represent people from a far broader number. And we also need to look at what's going to happen in the future. And, you know, it'd be nice to put a set of gates, not let anyone else in to Marston, but that's not going to happen. And when we have a look at what is happening around the area within a few minutes drive, there's not hundreds, but there's actually thousands of residential blocks that are going to come on stream in the next maybe decade. So we're not going to stop the tide of people that are actually going to want to access that riverbank and the river and the park area of Marston. It's actually for Coffs Harbour. It's the closest area for water sports that population has, and there's 70-odd thousand. So we've got to look in the future in terms of what's going to happen. And that area is going to attract far more visitors than what it currently does. You're not going to stop it. It's going to happen. So the best thing that we can do is try and manage that growth and try and create something that is going to be safe, secure, and cater for those people that want to use those areas, which are public areas. And I think if anyone is going to object or has a right to object in terms of what is going to happen, then we've got to go right back to the start of things, where this area was, and the whole country was owned by our Indigenous population. And to me, I think one of the most pertinent submissions has been by the local Aboriginal community. And, you know, they were displaced, etc., but we now live with them, greater understanding, and they're actually supporting this pathway project. And on the Create site, there's a very good submission from the Aboriginal community in terms of supporting the pathway, and I think that's very, very important. And in terms of understanding and acceptance, there are a lot of people, as Annette has spoken about, that would really like to access that riverbank, enjoy the park. They can go and park down where the park is, have something to eat at the park, get in the wheelchairs, pushers, whatever you wish, and go and take that lovely walk along the pathway. And these are the people that are not as able-bodied as what we are, people that are disadvantaged. I think in October 2017, Mayor King, Deputy Mayor Fenton, and one of the other councillors, I'm sorry I've forgotten your name, attended a meeting at Marsden, and this proposal was put forward. I believe there were 40 odd people. I was not there. And when asked for a show of hands in terms of support of this project, all of the hands were in the affirmative. I'm aware of one lady who says, pardon?
30 seconds.
30 seconds. I'm aware of one lady who didn't actually put a hand up. And community consultation has been done to the nth degree. I have been on a strategic planning committee before for a council and became very aware of stakeholder interest, community consultation process. And from an outsider looking in, I think that's all the boxes have been ticked. I commend the council officers in terms of their summary. I've finished. Of their summary of the proposal and the recommendation that they've put forward for being item 2 on the agenda. So thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Is there any questions from councillors for Roger? Thank you, Roger.
Thank you.
The next speaker is John Beswick, who is speaking against the item. Thanks, John. So the rules are all pretty clear by now.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Warning at 30 seconds.
Good. Right, I'm John Beswick, and connections with Marsden go back over 60 years. I wish to speak against options 1, 2, 3 that all specify a hard landscape pathway along the heart of Marsden, its riverbank. I respond to the previous comments because in my previous life, one of the things I used to be able to do was to do Disability Discrimination Act assessments, not in Oz, but in UK. I was also licensed to inspect aged care facilities as well. So I've got some appreciation. But I find that this project is a very poor solution to a very real problem. It potentially places vulnerable people at risk whilst alienating a local community from its council. I'd also like to heartily endorse Councillor Fenton and your comments to the previous item on the agenda, that the local community is best placed to know what its needs are. The Marsden Community Action Group is very keen to work with Council and develop a strategic plan and vision for this unique village. We have the capacity to consult directly with the community via our membership and a team of willing volunteers to ensure that Council understands the needs and preferences of our community. There's an open invitation to you there. It wasn't until the letter drop and the organising by Michelle McFadden, for which we thank her, for a drop-in day at the Almadopo Park, that a wide community awareness was created. I must stress that this took place after the proposal had been approved, not before the proposal was submitted. During the drop-in session, when the strong community objection to this proposal was evidenced to Bellingen Shire Council officers present, residents were advised their best option to prevent the proposed pathway, hard landscape pathway, was to develop and submit an alternative proposal which met the grant guidelines. Residents were given a closing date by which to submit their alternate proposal, which they met. Residents were also directed to the Create website to express their view consultation. Our subjective tally was a further overwhelming rejection of the proposal. A proposal that met the original guidelines was developed. The community consulted by conducting a door-to-door survey in the village of Marsden. Residents, voters and ratepayers were consulted at their own property. It was not a sheet of paper left lying loosely about wherever. The Marsden village community showed overwhelming support for the proposal which was presented by my colleague. In the agenda, Bellingen Shire Council announced a revised and recommended plan which includes a significant increase in hard landscaping from the installation of curb and guttering, which I presume is along the riverbank roadside. There has been no community consultation regarding this new proposal. No plan for the new option has been released. No community consultation whatsoever. though it appears to have been announced before council's had opportunity to vote. How does the new proposal strengthen a community that has shown its rejection of concrete and hard landscaping along the river bank? The Marsden Community Action Group urges the current Bellingen Shire Council to comply with their own village character statement, were set out in the adopted Development Control Plan 2010, Chapter 15, which clearly states in its aims to preserve the local environment in terms of its visual appearance and natural quality of its landscape. The definition of soft landscaping is an area which is not built upon or paved with pathways, driveways, etc. This proposal for a concrete pathway and associated curb and guttering will detract from the village amenity rather than strengthen our community. I'm just so sure that we would all support an improvement in disability access, provision of facilities, and all that goes with it. The construction of a concrete pathway along the naturally sloping riverbank would require considerable excavation and earthworks and associated disruption to soil profiles, require the removal of some existing well-established native trees, require the removal and potential re-siding of a number of well-established and used picnic tables. There are 14 in total. Potential damage to the root structure of a number of the remaining established trees with potential compromise. That could be up to 20 trees. In some areas along the riverbank, the proposed path is less than a metre from the trunks of established trees. Has council considered that eventually the path may be uplifted by the tree roots to create an ongoing safety risk? You've had that in Bellingen Church Street.
John, I'm just going to put it to the councillors to give you an extension on that. So, moved by Councillor Wright-Turner, second Councillor Fenton. All those in favour? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Much appreciated. I don't have much more. The construction of a concrete pathway on the top of the naturally sloping riverbank would adversely affect the uptake of water from a very light soil and increase the risk of erosion along the riverbank. That riverbank is a protection to the village of Marsden. And to compromise the integrity and stability of the riverbank, which is desperately in need of remedial works and has been for a number of years, we would wholeheartedly support any application by council to achieve funding for remedial works on that riverbank to secure it and make it stable. And construction of a concrete pathway near George Street, which create a steep drop off on the riverside of the path at the busiest section of riverbank. The path would eliminate the opportunity for picnic tables in this area, which exist, and remove the existing mature trees. No environmental impact is yet been undertaken that we're aware of in respect to these significant works within the fragile natural environment. Please listen to our community, I think, is the plea at the end of this. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, John. Is there any questions for John, councillors? Councillor Watson?
Yes.
Yes, dear.
Just wondering, you mentioned that you did a lot of door-to-door, like speaking directly with the residents of Maelstrom. What were the, did you put together the data on that? Like, what were the results of that?
I'll stand corrected, but I think there was 196 responses, and it was somewhere like 80, high 80s, 90% support. I'm sure those figures can be made exactly available to you. They may even be in the council possession because they were supplied to council.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
John, I've got a couple of questions. One, you do realise that this is a state government funded project, and actually the applicant had to be a community group. So this isn't a council process. This is this was open to all community groups. So you do understand that.
But the difficulty I have with that, because the assumption is that then the spending of the money becomes more important than the outcomes. And for the community, it's the outcome that's a significant element. I do understand
The
that,
state government makes decisions on who gets allocated those grants. There's a whole lot of
Yes.
provision for those grants.
and we were invited to submit an alternative proposal within the remit of the original grant, which we did.
I'm not sure if that's correct, because I know.
Well, that
I
was a
know
matter of
that-
debate, didn't it? We did yeah.
Do you want to say? Okay. So one of the other questions was, John, I know that I've been attending community meetings for, I think, over 2 years with which Trevor had instigated, and I know that Councillor Carter and Councillor Fenton also attended those. Were you at any of those meetings?
Not like most of the people in the area.
So why
We have no idea that they were on. And you know, I mean, you can canvass the people at to the rear if you wish, as to for a wider sample.
Thank you. Is there any further questions for John? Okay, thank you, John.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And so the last speaker is Karen Wilson. And she's also speaking against.
Can I please for the councillors to have in front of them when I'm speaking? It's just my points that I'll be addressing.
If you just leave them there, Karen, I'll just read them for you.
Thank you.
Okay, Karen, so the same rules apply there, so do you need an extra bit of time to do that?
Thank you. Our family moved to the beautiful village of Marsden 32 years ago. As you've heard, my name is Karen Wilson. I'm president of the Marsden Community Action Group. Our vision statement, I'll just read that first, is to focus on maintaining the integrity of the cultural, heritage, aesthetic and environmental values of the village of Marsden and surrounds, both now and into the future, to liaise with governments and other bodies with future planning of the area. I was going to talk to the points that you have in front of you, but will vary it somewhat. You would all have read our proposal, put together in just 5 weeks with scant information from council to assist us. No one was ever available to take my calls. It was the Director of Corporate and Community who said to us that it was possible for another proposal to be used for the grant money. Unfortunately, she did not elaborate with information like along the role modelling. This left us with a great disadvantage. In that short time, our diverse group worked together to put forward the proposal we have. We know our group has put together a top quality proposal that is overwhelmingly supported by the community. It was 191 signatures of residents, resident ratepayers and absentee ratepayers. The absentee ratepayers have asked us all along here to keep them informed of what is going on, hence their names are on our support list. I see obviously a council officer was given the task to find out any small item to maybe lower our proposal. We can handle that because it does not take away from the fact that we acted in complete consultation with the community and put together our information accurately. This does not mean that our community we all know how grants work, especially now with the Bridget McKenzie affair. Grants by votes. Of course, council does not want to send this money back. I can only assume that pressure has been put on them to use the grant because it adds a tick to our local MP's listed achievements in her electorate. This should not mean that our community has something foisted upon them that is clearly not wanted or in keeping with the village. John has already mentioned council's statement for Marsden in their development control plan. And I note Councillor Fenton's reference to Byron Bay about keeping their lifestyle, and I commend her on this. But council seems to have forgotten about the statement that is in their development control for Marston. The sporting areas in our grant have been neglected since the day they were constructed over 30 years ago. It is not right that the youth and younger ones who frequent the area have to use the bush, as nothing has been done about toilets. It is not right that there is no...
Could I just stop you for a minute? But there was a point when we about code of conduct. Can you make sure that you talk to the point and not go off and start talking about toilets and sporting fields? Let's talk. Can you please keep it to the pathway, please? Thank you. So it's an opportunity for you to have it's not an opportunity for you to have a council bash. It's an opportunity.
It's not. I'm not council bashing.
It's an opportunity for you to talk
I am addressing our proposal.
So I'm asking you to stay with that proposal.
Thank you. I note that. I could go on, and these items can and will be addressed because our proposal is supported and will unite our community. The sporting areas we're talking about is part of our proposal. It links all the sporting areas. It links the tennis courts, the recreation and bowling club, the BMX track, the skateboard ramp, the basketball area and sports oval. And we believe by doing this, it will genuinely strengthen the community amenity and access to facilities. The issue here...
You've got 30 seconds. If you need extra time, we can extend that.
Thank you. I shall need just a little extra time.
Okay, so we've got a mover and a seconder. All those in favour? Thank you.
The issue here is the riverbank and its environmental preservation, which is integral to the village on not just one issue. It is a very narrow riverbank. There, as John has pointed out, there is no evidence of an environmental study. There is no evidence of an engineering study for the pathway proposal. We probably expected that this should occur before major works occur on such a fragile riverbank. The Marston Community Action Group urges Council to consider the merits of our proposal. It has broad community support. It meets grant criteria. It was developed in consultation with community members. It does not cause damage to the natural landscape of the village. It creates safe access to existing sport and recreation areas in the village. It creates links to existing facilities which are enjoyed by families and visitors. It followed Ostroad's guidelines, re the path width, the same width as the only footpath in the village. Our proposal will strengthen our community. It's not about, we are not against accessibility. It is about preserving the environmental integrity of our riverbank. It's also about community and its true meaning, and having respect for and consulting with the residents and what's important to them. Most of our residents of our village have lived there for many years. Many younger families are increasingly moving here to raise their children in this special place. And you'll note that in the 2016 census, the population age of Marston is decreasing. It is not increasing. Many families are generational. The residents of Marston are there to stay, and we are not going away, and we will continue to work for the residents of Marston and preserving our riverbank. Thank you for your time.
Is there any questions, councillors, for Karen? Councillor Wright-Turner?
Karen, just in that last statement you made, did you mean to say that the average age in the community is decreasing? Yes, sorry, I understood it differently, yes. But thank you for clarifying that. Thank you.
Is there any further questions? Okay, thank you, Karen. Okay, councillors, I will open this up for questions from staff. We do have Todd. We do also have John, who's halfway design stuff. Councillor Benton.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, can I clarify, because my understanding of the riverbank stability issues that have been ongoing in Marsden for some time, and also the potential for trees to need to be removed, is that the riverbank stability issue is completely separate and won't be impacted by a path at all. It's not that close to the works that would need to be done if the state government ever does them, and that there isn't a need for anything close to 20, and may not even be any trees at all. Can we get clarity on that in the room, please?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll ask the acting deputy general manager to respond to that.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, there's definitely plenty of scope to avoid any of the established trees throughout the reserve with the pathway, the widths that are available, and there would definitely be design solutions around those. Any trees that would potentially be impacted, we've assessed the capital at face value, and it would only be any trees in poor states of health, and not generally related to some of the formalisation of car parking arrangements. But there's not really any need to compromise any of the well-established trees throughout the reserve.
Thank you.
It should be noted that obviously all of these considerations would be made through design development and through a review of environmental factors, which was pointed out that hasn't commenced yet, not at that stage of the project. Obviously, a comprehensive review of any environmental impacts would be done before any works.
Councillor Turner.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, my question's similar, so I'm not sure where it should go. It is around the process of approving something to go ahead before we know the environmental soundness of that going ahead. It is a sensitive area. Our riverbanks, the health of our river, we know that there's need for major works there. And I can't quite put together an approval to do something before knowing what the impact of that is actually going to be. So, yeah, I'm not sure where that should go.
Again, through you, Mr. Mayor, for any project, there obviously have been projects in the past that have gone through a concept stage and through an initial stage and not gotten off the ground because of impacts of environmental concern. But this type of project would have definitely a lot of precedence of success and successful implementation. And I think there was enough of that to proceed with grant applications and get to the stage of potential project for that. But obviously you must implement those checks and balances following through with that review of the environmental factors and complying with the outcome of that report.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, could I just...
Can I actually, before you ask the follow-up question on that, could I ask the General Manager actually to explain that process in terms of if the proposal goes forward, what are the steps the council has to take before that actually happens, on which John was stating. So it's not, this is going to go ahead, okay, go ahead, there's no other barriers. I just want to understand how that works.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I will, but I actually just want to step back and explain for everybody what has happened here. Stronger Country Communities is a grant program that was released by the state government and starting a couple of years ago. State government representatives came to Bellingen and made a presentation which was open to council and members of the community. The grant round was open to council and community groups. In the first round, there was a proposal put forward by the Marsden Community Action Group. Sorry. And by the North Beach Community Alliance. It did not go forward in round one because the council wasn't in a position to do that. In round two, the guidelines had been changed so that the council essentially had no option but to put forward that application into the grant. It is not a council project per se, it is not a council grant fund. We heard a lot of community concerns through the process, and we conveyed them to the New South Wales Government, both the administration of government and to the local MP. And we conveyed them strongly because we heard those concerns strongly. At the end of the day, it is the New South Wales Government who made the determination of the grant. That process includes a process that they run called choice modelling. The choice modelling process, they tell us, seeks to understand community opinion about projects in those grant rounds. And the New South Wales Government tells us that they did that as part of this process. The council was then advised of the successful projects, and this was one of them. Because of the community concerns that continue to be expressed, that we continue to convey to the state government and to the local MP, we have gone through a process of engagement in an endeavour to kind of address those concerns. But I think it's really important that you understand that the council has heard and has understood that there is a difference of opinion and has done its best to address it in a project that is not council's. So I think that's the first thing that needs to be understood. Any project where the council is doing building works has a process. There are invariably a whole lot of rules and processes that we have to follow, and they are operational matters, and including things like a review of environmental factors, which the Deputy General Manager referred to. Those are steps that happen routinely and operationally as part of probably 95% of the, if not all of the projects that we do. And they do look at the environmental impact, and it does, those processes ensure that legislation and regulation is followed, and if there are adjustments that need to be made, then they are made. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that. I think it's really important that everybody understands why we're here and how we got
So did you want to finish your question, Councillor?
Yes, thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. I mean, it's part of that process in how something like this would be implemented, because while there might not need to be the removal of, you know, trees along that bank area, just the number of trees and the size of the pathway and the proposed places it could go is obviously going to be over areas of tree root. And so how is that considered? Because you wouldn't want to put this into a beautiful area that has lovely trees and want everybody to be able to be wandering through it and be slowly, you know, affecting those trees adversely. So it's just a question as to how that's considered.
Good news, the one of the benefits is that most of the trees there are established, so it was a good idea of making a competent assessment of what those tree roots have done and are likely to do in the future. And we've generally engaged arborists to give us the best advice to mitigate any damage to the trees themselves primarily, and obviously to the ongoing maintenance of the footpath and any impacts that the root growth may have on the footpath itself.
Thank you.
Councillor Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor O'Tony. Just a couple of my issues. Just on the topic of barbecues, it was mentioned that there might have to be some barbecue removals or something. What's the situation with them?
Mayor, that was more in relation to bench seating.
Or bench seating. So would any need to be removed in order to install the path?
That is entirely likely to have to be removed and more likely relocated.
Relocated, okay.
And there's plenty of scope to do so.
Just two other issues. One, there was also mention of Austroads, and I presume that's the guide to road design, in particular Part 6A pedestrian and cycle paths. Has that been incorporated? Do you know if that's been incorporated into?
That's one of the guidelines we would follow when designing a project of this type.
Okay. And just as an overall observation, sorry.
And that is referred to in the report.
Right. An overall observation, Mr Mayor, I'm just a bit confused about what the community support for or against the particular proposal is, because from what I have heard, there's broad community support for and against.
Yeah. I've just got one question, probably for Maxine. One, is there a time frame around this, when this grant has to be spent?
Yeah, so through.
And the other point that one of the speakers made about the alternative proposal, my understanding was that was received too late, and that it was such a change of what the original proposal was, that it was risk that money wouldn't be allocated if that was the scope of the original project that was funded. If you changed it to that way where you were moving it to a completely different area, that possibly wouldn't meet the guidelines of the state government grant process, and that money would be lost. Are those things, are they in line with your understanding of what the process is?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, can you just clarify your first question for me again, please? Just repeat your first question.
So the time frame around
Yep.
whether that, so something.
Gotcha. Okay, so through you, Mr. Mayor, there are timeframes generally associated to any grant funding. With this particular one, commencement of works needs to start within 12 months of the announcement and completed within 2 years. Based on our original application and approval, the timeframe for the completion of the project was actually August last year. So we did make a request, and I've been working very closely with Department of Premier and Cabinet, who've been administering the funds, and the Grant Management Office in Sydney, to request some time variation for that, giving the opportunity to go out and re-engage and undertake some additional works around the confirmation of the actual project. We have received recent confirmation from the Grant Management Office now for the completion of the project to be end of June this year.
And so the other question around the timing of the other proposal, whether that fitted the time frame, and whether that, what the implications of that were in terms of the government funding.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, because they are competitive grant rounds, there is a specific open date and there is a specific close date, and any applicant must adhere to that or their application is actually ineligible. We did have discussions with, again, Department of Premier and Cabinet, who administer this, to understand what some of our options were in terms of presenting new proposals or different proposals. And the information that we received back from them is any new proposal would have to go through a formal variation request. It would need to comply with the original eligibility criteria, and all information and documentation, scoping, quotes, and all those sort of things would need to be provided in order just to be considered. So that was the first thing. The concerns that the New South Wales government raised with us in those conversations was around the fact that choice modelling had actually been undertaken as part of the original assessment of the project. And that given there would have been a significant change in the scope, also in terms of location as well, meant that it is highly unlikely to accept any major scope or any scope variation. And that was a consideration of both the choice modelling and also the time frame then in which to actually move that and progress that project along, and as well as a bunch of other things. And the biggest thing that they came back to, or one of the big points that they made, was that projects were actually prioritised through that choice modelling process. They were also prioritised as part of the resolution of council that was done when the original application was made, and also in discussions with the local Member of Parliament.
Mr. Mayor, through you, can I just add to that? Thanks, Maxine.
Yeah.
The day before or the day of the consultation in last in the drop-in session, we actually spoke to the Department of Premier and Cabinet to understand what the options were. And they were the three options that were basically presented to that meeting, which was do nothing and give the money back, go ahead with the current proposal and receive feedback on that, or the community could nominate an alternate project. And so that was the advice we had from DPC the day of that milestone drop-in session, and that was what we used to inform the community. So that enabled at least an alternative proposal. However, that's now being looked at, and I think maybe the Deputy General Manager Operations acting could talk to that in terms of how it fits with the disability access and a range of other criteria that weren't met in that alternative proposal.
Yeah, the proposal that was put forward, I think normally the path was 1.2 metres wide, and it didn't make any accommodation for cyclists or any shared use of the path whatsoever, which I understand was the original intent of the application itself. And that's something that we have tried to incorporate into the design options that we're tendering. I mean, just referring to the Osroad Guide 6A, the minimum desirable width for a footpath to accommodate wheelchair access is 1.5 metres. That's an absolute desirable minimum, with the 1.8 metre recommended. I'm not entirely sure where the 1.2 came from or where that advice was received from, but it didn't seem to match up with our interpretation of the design guide.
Could I clarify the process for the alternative proposal to go forward and find out how much, did they have all the information that was necessary? Because if an essential part of that grant was to have the, the right size for it to be, meet those requirements and accessibility, if that information wasn't part of what they had, then potentially a lot of work was done that could never go ahead. So just wanting to clarify how that alternate process was informed. I know it wasn't a council process, but we did initiate it in a sense with an invitation.
Yeah, Councillor Turner, the circumstances were quite difficult. We had arranged an engagement process, as I explained. It came to our attention that there was likely to be difficulties in the discussion that was to be had. We got information, the information that we could from both the local member of parliament and from the state government, in circumstances that they were puzzled about, I have to say, given the process that had been gone through. Our staff, when they went to Moston, were confronted with circumstances which were very unfortunate. There was quite a lot of people present. There were signs up that were that had wording that was very inappropriate.
A lot of people, and just to be clear, a lot of the audience wouldn't have seen those. We removed them before most people arrived.
The shelter shed had been smeared with dog feces. No, that is true.
Well, that was their cry,
and the staff were presented with significant difficulties and did the best they could in difficult circumstances. The Shell had the information to hand that we were able to get from the local MP's office and from the state government, but we had no more detail to hand it back.
And as a further question, just because I don't understand what it means, what is choice modelling that the state government undertook, and what kind of process is that in relation to the community?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, as a way of the state government independently undertaking an assessment on all of the projects, and this is consistent across all councils that made application, they undertook what they call choice modelling. And basically what that is they contacted, the numbers that they provided to me was approximately 100 across the local government area, where they undertook a quick survey basically to try to understand the community sentiment around what the actual projects were, and also what priority they would actually put them into in terms of any funding being offered to those projects. So it was a quick over the phone survey is my understanding. I think in round one they actually were down at physically on the streets talking to people. But for round 2, it was a phone survey, which was to understand the community's sentiment around all of the projects that were put forward and what priority they would like to see them funded.
So, Councillor, can I clarify your question? Was that about the width of the path? Was that part of that? Trying to an understanding of what was required?
The first one, like the first part of my question, yes, because it seems that the alternate, from the report that we've received, that the alternate application just didn't meet certain aspects of the guidelines, one of which was the accessibility, both in the width of the path and perhaps in the placement of it. And I'm just wondering if the people who did a lot of work to put that together were aware that they were critical criteria.
Yeah. So I suppose the question is that council's responsibility to provide that information, or is that a state government responsibility in terms of when you apply for a grant, there is a whole list of requirements that you need to do, and you put your application in. If they don't meet that measure, then it's sort of knocked out. Was it the council's obligation, or was it state government's guidelines that should have guided that second proposal in terms of whether it's not? I mean, because it feels like there's a thought that somehow council hasn't given the information to the alternative route, or the alternative pathway proposal.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the Stronger Country Communities Fund round 2 was around community supporting groups or community organisations bringing projects to council. As part of that, there was a list of requirements that the community organisations actually had to undertake and bring to council, and that again is around the detailed scope, which is everything from widths and whatever the upgrade or the infrastructure project was that they wanted to put forward, as project budgets, project plans, quotes, how it's actually going to boost livability and amenity in the area, evidence of the need, and a whole series of criteria. And that information is outlined in the Stronger Country Communities Fund guidelines and available to community members to stipulate and help them with information and the requirements of what would be looked at as part of both council considering that as a project and also as part of the assessment process through the state government. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, is there any further questions, councillors? Okay, so I'm looking for a mover. Clinton.
Can I be difficult one more time?
Hold it 1 second. Okay, so you're moving.
I'd like to move somewhere between option 1 and 2, which is that it's as per option 1, but with 1.8 metre width, not 1.5.
Up on the screen for you, councillor. Okay, so the new, what you're proposing, councillor, is that
Council resolved to deliver the pathway project option 1 with a width of 1.8. Option 1 and option 2 are the same except for the width, aren't they?
No.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, so option 1 provides the option to have a pathway through the park at a width of 2.5 metres, but option 2 provides a path through the park, putting cyclists on the roadside, and that's the difference between the two path widths.
No, that's option 3, isn't it?
No.
No.
Option 2.
Option 3 puts it along the roadside.
So it's option 2 with the width. So what I'm wanting is option 2 with the width of 1.8, is that correct?
Yes.
Sorry for the confusion.
Okay, so it all stays the same except for the width of the path.
Yes.
Is that right, councillor? So it's just that. Okay, is that up? Okay, so now looking for a seconder for that motion. Councillor Jenkins. Would you like to speak to that, Councillor Jenkins?
I would, through you, Mr. Mayor. This is obviously a really emotive subject. This is really emotive for me as well as a parent of a child who uses a wheelchair. I think that this project is the start of something bigger. So there's no reason that the community, if it finds a way to work together again, can't look at the alternative option as a next grant to be sourced if that's a strong feeling that that needs to happen too. That's until that came up, it was the first I'd heard of it. It's not in the pedestrian access mobility plan as far as I know, whereas this other project has been in there for a number of years. It's been a long process to get to this point. As we've discussed, there's very limited opportunities to get big chunks of money, to get big infrastructure done, and for small shires like ours, it really matters. But this isn't about spending the money for the sake of it. This is about a long process for a lot of people who have identified this need. You know, I think there's some other things that have come out of this dialogue which is really important, like the sporting facilities might need work. Again, that's stuff that the community and council need to come together and work on. And you know, and whether those facilities are even mobility accessible or even adaptable to be mobility accessible is another whole conversation, and we need everyone talking together and working together. It's not a matter of how many people said they want it, how many said they didn't, how many said they wanted as long as it's small. It's actually not a matter of that, because social justice doesn't rely on the majority, or women wouldn't have the vote. Aboriginal people would still be living in far worse squalor than they already are. We won't bridge these social justice gaps unless leaders show courage, and that's what I'm willing to do. I'm willing to come and talk to the community about what this means, and why it's so important. You know, I really hear what Annette shared with us, and I really acknowledge the bravery of doing that, because when you're talking to community about issues like this, I'll tell you who you won't hear much from, and that's people with disability and their carers. You won't hear much from them because they're too busy most of the time. What their day looks like to get out of bed is so different to yours. The whole of your energy can be taken up with the most basic things, and you wouldn't even know. You wouldn't even know how much those people in your community want to see the river, because they're not there. You wouldn't know. They're struggling to get in and out of their own homes. They're struggling to access government services. They're struggling to do a lot of basic things that you take for granted. So when we have an example of a huge amount of money that we can get one of these things done that the community has asked for a long time, I say we have to take it. And nothing is ever perfect, and I know change is really, really hard, and every community feels this. Every big decision we make, there's people reacting like, no, I don't want it to be different to how it is. Fixing the Memorial Hall, it's falling down in parts of the, there are still people going, no, don't change it, it's our hall. So what I'm asking for your community is to come together after this, because there's been some really horrible stuff happen there with really personal stuff. And this isn't a personal issue, it's an emotive issue, but it's not about any one person. It's about your whole community's future. And realise that it is a change, but it's an opportunity. So there's two things that happen to older Australians in our community. There's two things that happen in this child. Can you stop doing that, please? It's really rude and disrespectful. There's two things that happen when you age in Australia. You acquire age-related disability or you die. The majority of Australians, that is our future. So everyone in our room, which would you prefer? I know where I want to be. I want to be here for a long time. That's what will happen to almost everyone in Milestone over time, is they will acquire mobility, particularly related conditions. So what we're saying by saying we don't want change is we're saying we don't want those people to be fully part of the community. There's lots of, like when most people in this room were young, the places for people with disability were separate places. There were special schools, there were special buses. Hospitals were a great place for you. You could usually get around a hospital. The rest of the world wasn't accessible. Now, I live this right now with my daughter. We've fallen off gutters, we've gone down embankments, we've not been able to get into public buildings, we've not been able to get into almost anyone's homes that we know without a huge physical effort for me, and I'm 47 and I can't do it much longer. So we've holidayed in Milestone. That was the one thing we noticed. What a great community. There's so much accessible stuff. You can get into the shop. You can get in, and that's the post office. There's heaps of communities that don't have that. You can go and have a great coffee. You can go to the park. You can go to the surf club, and those surf lifesavers will help you onto the beach. They look for you and say, let's make this happen. Like this is a place that's flat. There's so many communities that don't. Bellingen's a shocker. You can't get anywhere. It's so hilly without footpaths. So the one thing it's missing is some good connectivity for people who use wheels or aren't as steady on their feet. That's one of the things that's missing. You've already got so much going for you in that community for ageing in place. The age population might be going down slightly, but believe me, the baby boom is ageing. That's not going to last. What we have across the whole of Australia is a massively ageing population. But we're not just talking about age, we're not just talking about disability. Inclusive pathways and any other facilities work for people with injury, and they work for parents with young children who are using prams and whatever. I hated concrete paths until my daughter was diagnosed and I was struggling to have a baby and a 2-year-old who couldn't walk. I never thought I would have been fighting for concrete paths ever in my life. But now I know how important they are for people to be able to leave their home and be a part of the world. And it's really, really important for that reason. We've heard you already. Okay. We've already heard you've got disability tourism in your community, disability related inclusive tourism. It's the biggest growing tourism area. And our Shire is known for nature-based tourism. People with disability want to be part of that too. They don't want a pathway that's in through the suburbs of Milestone. They want to be able to see the river like everyone else and be a part of that space. So it might not be about you, and hopefully it's not about you soon, but you know, accessibility is about everyone in the community, and I think we need to take the opportunity to make this one happen.
I'm going to give everyone an opportunity. I've got Councillor Wright turn first.
I was a slow hand up as a speaker against, because it's a very difficult decision to make, because I am an advocate for accessibility, but the division that this particular process has created, as I see it, in part of our broader community, but in the small community of Milestone, is such that I wish there was a different option here that could be go back, bring the community together and actually work out something that meets all the accessibility things, which I don't think anybody who's speaking against it doesn't want that. I think Milestone is a very inclusive community. It's the nature of that area, and it's the nature of getting it right. And I'm not saying getting it right might not mean there doesn't end up being a pathway through there, but it needs to be a pathway that everybody, really feels speaks for what the community wants. And I find the level of division that I've experienced from people over this is really, really concerning, and don't want to support pressing ahead regardless. but there isn't another option other than speaking for it or speaking against it.
Councillor Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've heard a lot of discussion for and against, and about trees and the possible removal of trees, the impact of the roots on the pathway, relocation of seeding, compliance with Austrade standards, etc., etc. But I do reflect also two things that I reflect on. One is the fact that the installation of the pathway will give the ability for access, pedestrian, cycle, wheelchairs, etc., disability, from one end of town to the other. But it also provides increased community safety for both the people using the footpath and also traffic users, vehicle drivers, etc., because it gets those people off the road and onto the footpath. So it's a general community safety enhancement. So I'm supportive of it for that respect.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, it's very hard to say much more than what Jenny said. Councillor Fenton, you just delivered a wonderful speech. Thank you. I'm speaking on a personal level. I'm ageing. I'm old in many people's eyes. But with that comes the fact that you are not as able as you used to be. I could be one of those people that ends up in a mobility scooter, I don't know, with a mobility scooter, and I don't know where it's going. But I want to know that there is somewhere beautiful like Marsden with a park that I can go and visit. I used to go and visit it often when I lived in Bellingen, just as an escape to get away from the heat. I'm happy in Dorigo now. But for people to be able to visit that wonderful little village, which is still a seaside village, if you have that pathway there, it will bring more people to town. But the big thing is, once you get that first pathway installed, it can then lead into obtaining more grants to get more pathways. So I fully support this resolution as it is.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not going to dwell on the importance that this is not a council, that this is a council project, because it's not. It's a community project funded by the state government. The funds given to this council for the project cannot be redirected into other projects. If we reject the funds given to us, they just have to be returned. And that's just, yeah, it's just a waste in my eyes. I'll vote in favour of option 2 with the recommendation with the revised width of the pathway of 1.8 metres, which will reduce the removal of trees. I would also like to council to meet with the Maelstrom Community Action Group and work together to come up with a plan to seek government funding in grants to put their plan into action in the near future.
Yes. Okay, I'll speak briefly on, I also support the motion. We've had similar issues as our term in council and in the last term as council around community division. And I understand the arguments for people about the concern about loss of what was there before. We had a very, very similar issue here with the Main Street plan and the removal of some trees there. And we had people who were friends of mine that absolutely opposed that idea. But the job of the councillor is to listen to all the arguments, to listen to all of our staff around the technicalities of what we're trying to do, but also having our own mind about our own vision for this Shire. And I certainly had a lesson around the Main Street plan about the sort of people that don't access the Main Street and the people that don't have that opportunity to go to places where everyone else goes. And it made me think a lot stronger about, well, what does that look like? What is a community that is inclusive? So it's not about our own personal views on what's going to happen for me. It's about the greater good. And we have to make those decisions as leaders, even though sometimes they're really, really hard to make. But we have to be informed, we have to listen, we have to try and find compromise, and we have to then do what we think is best. And that might not be in line with what everyone else thinks, but it's what we do as councillors. This is what we put lots of hours in about. And we would love to have a vision of this Shire being a place where people who have mobility issues and have accessibility issues will go, that's a great place to holiday. Because there is an opportunity for me to go down that river. I mean, I took my girls up to Dorrigo in the holidays down to a beautiful place called Coachwood Falls. There's no way in the world that anyone in a wheelchair could possibly get down to that place. There's so many places that they cannot go. Let's give them some of those options that they can come and go along the river and have a picnic with their family by the river and maybe go off along on the pathway with their siblings, or if it's someone that's older that's grown up around the river can still enjoy the river. And that's the things that I make decisions based on. Not whether it's going to impact someone's their view or whatever. It's about what is for the greater good, and that's where I see this decision being made. It's about thinking about everyone in our community, and we need to do that more than ever. Councillor Fenton, did you want to provide a reply?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't quite finished my moving speech, sorry, Councillor Harrison. I just wanted to add that people with disability in Australia are around, it's one in 5 people measured as having a disability, and you bring it up to around 1 in 4 if you include people who are directly impacted, so that's carers and immediate family. So about a quarter of people across Australia live with disability. If you add age-related disability to that, it goes through the roof in this country. So we're not talking about a minority issue, we're talking about very much a central part of our community. And I think, as I alluded to before, those people used to be in separate places in their homes and in other places. They didn't used to be in the community. And as Annette's mentioned, it's been 28 years since the Disability Discrimination Act, and people with disability are out in the community now. They've had enough of being in separate places. They want to be in all the good places, the good places that make Australia a great place to live. So, I think it's totally unacceptable 20 years on that a woman can't and her son can't go and collect their mail in one of our towns. That's totally unacceptable without moving on a public road, as you say. And having moved on those public roads, it's not safe, especially during holiday periods. So I think, we have an obligation to take this opportunity to get the beginning of accessibility in the town sorted. So let's do that, please.
Okay, so I will put it. All those in favour? Councillor Carter, Councillor Fenton, Councillor Jenkins, Councillor Harrison, Councillor King. Against? Councillor Wilson. I'm just going to adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes. So I'm just going to give everyone 5 minutes break.
Thank you.
Thanks for the environment.
Okay, so we've reconvened at 12:17, and we are on item 13.1, which is the privacy statement of privacy management plan. I might just get Stephen to, Stephen. Okay, we'll just get Stephen to let us know what that's involved in, give us an overview.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's basically council already has a privacy position, and it is rather complex because we have a number of legislative requirements attached to privacy and the management of personal information. The proposal was to put forward a statement and plan whereby the first part of which is the statement contains a very succinct position with regard to it without all the necessary legislative references, whereas the privacy management plan, of course, has all those in-depth aspects. So the statement itself provides an easy, accessible, readable item for the community, so as they know that their personal information will be appropriately protected and dealt with according to appropriate legislation.
Is there any questions? So this is going out on exhibition for 28 days, so that's what we're moving here. Can I have a little mover? Councillor Wright Turner. Seconder. Harrison. All those in favour? Item 13.2 is construction services progress report. And once again, I will open that up for questions. We'll jump off here at the Deputy General Manager Operations.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, 2 one-word answers, questions. Has Dangar Falls work started, and when's the Memorial Hall work due to start or looking to start?
You take Dangar Falls. So we've awarded the design for the Dangar Falls new platforms. So the work's currently underway. So geotechnical investigations have been done, surveys have been done, and they're commencing the design.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, on the Mem Hall, we're in detailed design phase at the moment. We're not expecting construction to start until about September after the Fine Music Festival this year, but there will be a report to Council February, or maybe an extraordinary meeting after the February meeting that will present the final concept, which is a lot more detailed than what you've seen already, to progress into that DA stage and construction diagram stage.
Are there any further questions? Okay, so looking for a mover. Councillor Fenton. Seconder, Councillor Carter. If there is no opposition, I will put it. All those in favour? Item 13.3, maintenance service progress report. Once again, we've gone off here. If there is any questions. Okay, if not, I'm looking for a mover. Councillor Carter. Seconder. Harrison. If there's no opposition, I will put it. All those in favour? Item 13.4, planning progress report, and we have Luke Perry here, Group Lead of Planning. So I will open that up for questions if there is any. Okay, looking for a mover. Councillor Jenkins. Seconder. Councillor Harrison. If there is no opposition, we'll put it. All those in favour? Item 13.5, this is the council meeting commencement time for the February meeting, and we are going back to 6 o'clock instead of the
back to 9 o'clock.
Sorry, going back to 9 a.m.
Going back to 9.
6 o'clock, that's right. Then can we, so I might get someone to clarify the reason for that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. There's a couple of reasons for it. There is a significant regional event happening on that evening.
Really?
That a lot of staff and I imagine community will be attending. But more so, even if that wasn't happening, we would be recommending that the 6 o'clock start wouldn't be appropriate because of the volume of reports that are coming to you in February. As an example, I'll just jump into my notes from just one of my departments. From the Sustainable Environment section, you will have the corporate carbon paying back from exhibition, the climate emergency response framework back from exhibition, the quarterly report for sustainable environment, the environmental levy community fund, the pesticide review recommendation, and the biodiversity strategy, just from one of my departments, and I have 6. And then there's the operations reports as well. So even if it wasn't for the fact that there was a regional event on, we wouldn't be suggesting council try to tackle the size of the February meeting. Now, the reason we haven't recommended to move, because March is already a 6 p.m. meeting, the reason we haven't recommended to move April from a 9 a.m. to a 6 p.m. is because April is the meeting where you will be looking at long-term financial plans, annual budget, the delivery program, the operational plan, and all of those really big things that come to you in that report as well. So what we've suggested in the report is that when we set the dates for the 4 nighttime meetings for the next session of nighttime meetings, that we incorporate one extra in that.
Is there any further questions on that? Okay, looking for a mover. Carter. Seconder, Mr. Benton. If there is no opposition, I will put it. All those in favour? Item 13.6 is the Building and Regulation Progress Report. And I know the councillors have read that. Is there any questions out of that? Looking for a mover. Councillor Benson, Councillor Carter. If there is no opposition. Are you
getting an O.
Okay, if there's no opposition, I'll put it. All those in favour? Okay. Item 13.7, report on investments as of the 31st of December 2019. We do have Chris here, CFO. If there is any questions, I will open that up for questions. Councillor Harrison and Councillor Clark.
Chris, it's nice to see that our total cash investments has gone up around $3 million. Does that come from Rabobank? Something like that? Or have we received $1 million from the government?
No, but we're about to.
Well, that's good, thank you. I just thought that the increase might have included that.
No.
Through you, Mr. Baird, no, that the $1 million hasn't come through in December. This is a December report. The increase in cash was twofold. So that we had the Southern Phone sale. So there's almost $800,000 there. And then we had about $1 million in RMS money come through from invoicing for state roads as well.
Thank you.
The big increases there.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. I note that there's some term deposits been matured. Have they gone back into reinvestment or have they gone into our general fund?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, as you can see on page 4 of the report. So there was $1 million from Rabobank that matured on the 9th of the 12th. There was another $1 million from Police and Nurses Bank on the 16th of the 12th, and then we've reinvested that $2 million into into Suncorp, and $1 million in Bank of Victoria as well. So that's been reinvested.
It's all been reinvested.
Is there any further questions? Looking for a mover. Councillor Harrison, second, Councillor Tanner. If there's no opposition, I'll put it, all in favour. Okay, so now we're going into confidential matters.
We're out. We did move it.
Okay, so I'm looking for a mover to move us into confidential. Councillor Carter, seconder, Councillor Harrison. All those in favour?
So they can stop live streaming. Yes,